They told me I was dying. The words didn't echo. They landed heavy, final, like the closing of a door. I remember staring at the doctor's lips moving, his voice steady, clinical. Words like advanced, inoperable, limited time. Words no one wants to hear, least of all a man who had spent his life offering hope to others. I was a rabbi. For decades I had led prayers, buried the dead, blessed newborns, held families in their darkest hours. People came to me looking for answers, for faith, for comfort. And now here I was, lying in a hospital bed in Chicago, tubes in my arms, machines buzzing around me, and I felt nothing but emptiness. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, painting everything a pale, unforgiving white. The smell of antiseptic clung to the air. My body felt like it wasn't mine anymore, weak, hollowed out, betraying me with every shallow breath. I heard the rustle of nurses in the hallway, the squeak of a cart's wheels, the beeping monitor that reminded me I was still here. Barely. I tried to pray. My lips formed the words I had recited countless times. Baruch atah Adonai. But the words felt dry, mechanical. They didn't rise. They didn't lift. They fell flat, landing back on me like ashes. My chest tightened with the realization. The very faith I had spent my life proclaiming now felt distant, unreachable. I closed my eyes and thought of my congregation. What would they say if they knew that their rabbi, their teacher, their spiritual guide lay here not only dying, but doubting? Would they be scandalized, or would they understand? A part of me almost hoped they never found out. Nights were the worst. The days, at least, brought the distraction of doctors, nurses, the occasional visitor. But nights stretched long and hollow. Machines hummed, shadows lengthened, and loneliness pressed against me like a weight. I would shift in the bed, trying to find comfort, and each movement sent a reminder of how frail I had become. It was during one of those nights that despair hit hardest. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the tiles. Where are you, I thought? Have you abandoned me? Or did I abandon you long ago? I remembered funerals I had presided over, families who had looked to me for answers I didn't have. I remembered the young man who had begged me, "Why did God let my mother die?" I had spoken words of tradition, of mystery, of faith. Now, those same words mocked me in my own silence. I thought of my children, grown now, with their own lives. Would they sit by my bed when the end came? Would they remember me as the father who read them bedtime prayers, or the weary man, now too tired to believe them himself? The bitterness rose in me like bile. "So this is it?" I whispered into the sterile air. "All these years, all the prayers, and this is how it ends?" The machines kept their rhythm, uncaring. I don't know how long I lay there, staring into the dark. My body ached, my spirit felt like ash, and yet I couldn't stop thinking. If there is a God who listens, he isn't listening to me now. And that's when something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no thunder, no visions, just stillness, heavier than silence, almost like the air itself had thickened. I noticed it first when the hum of the machines seemed to fade, as though they were receding into the background. The hospital smells, bleach, latex gloves, the faint tang of iron from my IV, all softened under something else. A scent. Faint, impossible, but unmistakable. Roses. I remember my heart racing, my breath caught in my throat. I turned my head toward the doorway, half expecting to see a nurse with flowers, but the hallway light was empty, shadows stretching long and unbroken. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body awake now. I couldn't explain it, but I knew someone was there. And then, in the darkest night, I whisper, even now, as I recall it, someone came I never expected. I wasn't always a man of doubt. In fact, if you had met me years ago, you would have seen someone certain, rooted, steady as an oak tree. I was raised in a home where tradition was the air we breathed. My earliest memories are of candles flickering on Friday nights, my mother's gentle voice reciting blessings, my father's firm hand guiding me through the prayers. The rhythms of faith weren't just rituals, they were the language of our lives. As a boy, I loved the synagogue. I remember tugging on my father's sleeve, begging him to let me sit closer to the bema so I could watch every gesture, hear every word. The melodies carried me. Even before I could read, I could hum the tunes of the prayers, my voice blending with the congregation like I had always belonged there. By the time I was a teenager, I knew what I wanted: to serve, to lead, to give others what faith had given me. When my peers were chasing after careers in law or medicine, I was chasing after scripture, buried in study late into the night. The words of Torah felt alive in me, shaping me, calling me. Becoming a rabbi was not a decision I wrestled with. It was the only path I could see. And when the day came that I stood before a congregation, tallit draped over my shoulders, opening the scrolls with trembling hands, I felt like my life had reached its purpose. And for many years, I believed it had. I married. I raised children. I blessed newborns in the arms of nervous parents, counseled couples on the brink of collapse, and buried the old who had lived long lives. My voice echoed in hospital rooms, in wedding halls, in gravesides. I was there for my people, and they trusted me. But here is the confession I rarely let anyone see, not even my wife, not even my closest friends. Doubt began to grow in me. Quietly at first, like a crack in a wall you can barely notice. It began with prayers unanswered. I remember sitting at the bedside of a child in our community, no older than my own daughter had been at the time. The parents clutched my hands, tears streaming down their faces. We prayed. Oh, how we prayed. Every word felt like a rope thrown into heaven. But the child slipped away anyway. I had to stand at the funeral days later, speaking words of comfort I didn't believe. That was the first crack. Then came more. Tragedies I couldn't explain, sufferings that made no sense. I told myself faith was not about answers, but about trust. I repeated it in sermons, in counseling sessions, in moments when others looked to me with pleading eyes. But each time, inside me, the silence of heaven felt louder. I remember one Yom Kippur, standing before the ark, leading hundreds in prayer, voices rising in unison. My lips moved, my voice strong, but in my heart I was whispering, "Are you there? Or am I just speaking into the void?" The guilt of that ate at me. I, the rabbi, the one people called for guidance, was secretly hollowing out inside. I carried their burdens, their sorrows, but who carried mine? At home, I grew restless. My wife noticed. "You don't sing the blessings the way you used to," she said one night, her voice gentle but searching. I brushed it off, told her I was tired, told her the responsibilities weighed heavy. But inside, I knew it wasn't just fatigue. It was absence. And yet, I never told anyone. How could I? To admit my doubt would feel like betrayal. People needed me strong, unwavering. So I put on the robe, I wore the tallit, I recited the prayers. On the outside, I was the steady rabbi. On the inside, I was a man slowly unraveling. The guilt was sharpest when I looked at my children. They had grown up watching me bless the challah, light the candles, lead prayers. To them, I was the model of faith. But I couldn't tell them how many nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if it was all just tradition without presence. I tried to bury the doubts. I buried them under study, under service, under busyness. But doubts don't die when you bury them. They wait. They whisper. They grow roots in the silence. And so, by the time the illness came, I was already hollow inside. My body was failing, but truthfully, my spirit had begun failing long before. That is what made the diagnosis so crushing. When the doctors said, "You don't have much time," I realized with a sting of terror that I wasn't ready. Not because I feared death itself, but because I feared what I would find, or not find, beyond it. For the first time, I understood the very people I had tried to comfort all these years. The widows who asked, "Where is God?" The fathers who screamed at me, "Why didn't he save my child?" I had answered them with calm, with theology, with tradition. Now I knew their raw pain because it was mine, and yet part of me longed desperately for an answer, a sign, a whisper in the dark that it wasn't all in vain. That's why what happened next shook me so deeply. Because in the stillness of my darkest night, when I was most certain heaven had gone silent, someone came I never expected. Nights in the hospital are unlike anything else. They stretch longer than they should, each minute dragging its feet like an old man walking uphill. By day, at least, there is motion. Doctors with their clipped voices, nurses bustling in and out, visitors bringing flowers or awkward conversation. But when the sun goes down, when the hall's empty, and when the only light is the dim glow of machines, that's when despair presses closest. I lay there, the thin blanket pulled to my chest, feeling every beep of the monitor like a drumbeat of my weakness. My body felt foreign to me. Wires and tubes snaking out from my arms, the hiss of oxygen at my side. My skin itched where the IV pierced, but I was too tired to scratch. My mouth was dry, yet water no longer brought relief. Sleep came and went in broken fragments. I would drift off, only to wake to the same sterile ceiling tiles, the same hum of fluorescent lights, the same smell of bleach and disinfectant. At times, I wondered if this was already death, an endless loop of half-sleep and silence. It was sometime past midnight when the bitterness came back sharp. I turned my head toward the window, where the city lights blinked faintly in the distance. "So this is what it comes to," I whispered into the emptiness, "after all these years. After all the prayers, the sermons, the Torah scrolls, the weddings, the funerals, silence." No answer came, only the rhythm of the machines. My chest tightened. I thought of my family, their faces blurred by time and exhaustion. I wondered if they prayed for me that night, or if they had resigned themselves just as I had. A hot tear slipped down my temple. I hadn't cried like that in years. I must have dozed again, because when I next opened my eyes, the clock read 3:33 a.m. I remember the numbers because they startled me. Something about them burned into me, as if the digits themselves carried a weight. My eyes darted to the room, scanning the shadows. That's when I noticed it. Stillness. Not the ordinary stillness of an empty hospital, but something deeper, heavy, tangible. It was as if the air itself had thickened, pressing gently against my skin. Even the machines, though they still beeped, seemed distant, muffled, as though their sound had stepped aside to make room for something greater. I shifted uneasily, my breath quickening. And then it came. A scent. Roses. It made no sense. There were no flowers in my room. The nurses had taken the wilted bouquet my daughter brought last week. Yet here it was. The fragrance unmistakable, rich but not overwhelming, soft yet filling every corner. My hands trembled against the blanket. My heart pounded harder than it had in weeks. Fear and awe mingled in me, curling through my veins. I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. No sound, but I knew. Someone was there. The presence wasn't imagined. It was as real as the bed beneath me, as real as the pulse in my wrist. I turned my head slowly toward the corner of the room, where the shadows gathered thickest. My eyes strained in the dim light, and for a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks. But then she stepped forward. I froze. My breath caught. My body stiffened, though not from fear, from recognition, from something deeper than words. She wasn't radiant in the way I would have expected. No blinding light, no towering figure that filled the room with fire. She came in gentleness, a woman clothed in soft white, with a veil of blue that seemed almost to shimmer in the dim light. Her hands were folded, her eyes lowered, but when she lifted them, when she lifted them, I felt as though my very soul had been pierced. Eyes of sorrow, eyes of compassion, eyes that had seen suffering deeper than mine, and yet met it not with judgment, but with mercy. My lips trembled, my chest rose and fell with shallow, shaky breaths. I don't understand," I whispered. She did not speak immediately. She simply stood there, still as stone, yet alive with presence. The scent of roses grew stronger, wrapping around me like an embrace. Tears stung my eyes. My hands clenched the blanket. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Something in her gaze held me there, not with force, but with love. Finally, my voice cracked, raw and small. "Who are you?" The answer was not shouted. It wasn't even spoken aloud in the way we know voices. It was more like a whisper in my heart, a knowing that bypassed words. "I am the mother who never left." I choked on a sob. My body shook. For years, I had buried my doubts, hidden my emptiness, told others to cling to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. And here, in my weakest hour, in the middle of the night, she came. I pulled my trembling hands to my face, covering my tears. "Why?" I whispered. "Why me?" I mocked. I doubted. I failed. Why me? The presence didn't waver. The gentleness didn't fade. And then she stepped closer, her figure glowing faintly in the dim hospital light. She reached out her hand, not touching me, not yet, but extending it, as if to say, "You are not alone." I gasped, shaking, hardly able to breathe. My heart felt as though it might burst with the weight of it all. And as my tears blurred my vision, I whispered the words I never thought I would say. I opened my eyes, and she was there. I had always thought that if heaven ever broke through into my world, it would come with grandeur, flashes of light, trumpets sounding, a voice that shook the walls. But no, when she stood before me, there was none of that. She came as a mother, gentle, quiet, humble, and yet her presence filled the room more powerfully than anything I had ever known. Her veil was soft blue, but not of any fabric I had ever seen. It seemed woven from light itself, threads shimmering with something that moved and breathed. Her robe flowed simple and white, like linen touched by dawn. Her hands were folded close to her chest, her head tilted ever so slightly, not as a queen commanding, but as a mother, waiting, patient, tender. But her eyes, it was her eyes that undid me. They weren't the eyes of an image on a prayer card, or the eyes painted on ancient icons. They were living, deep brown, warm, brimming with something I couldn't name. Sorrow, yes, sorrow so deep I could feel it in my bones. But also compassion, infinite compassion, the kind that doesn't excuse your wounds but weeps with them. And then she looked at me fully. The weight of her gaze shattered me. All my defenses, the years of pride, of leading others while secretly doubting myself, of standing tall before congregations while crumbling inside, collapsed in that instant. I was bare before her, more exposed than any hospital gown could make me. I tried to speak, but my throat closed, my lips trembled. All I could manage was a broken whisper, "Why me?" For a moment, silence, and then in a voice softer than breath, she spoke. "Why do you cling to doubt when love is what heals?" The words entered me like fire and water at the same time, burning away the hardness, quenching the dryness of my soul. My chest heaved. I shook my head, tears spilling onto my cheeks. I don't know how to believe anymore," I confessed, choking. "I've led prayers for others. I've spoken words of faith I didn't feel. I mocked in secret. I doubted in silence. I built walls because I didn't want to be disappointed again. My voice broke. I couldn't go on." She stepped closer, her expression not stern, not condemning, but sorrowful. A single tear slipped from her eye, tracing down her cheek. She was weeping, not because of her own pain, but mine. That undid me completely. I sobbed like a child. My chest convulsed, my hands clutching the thin blanket, my body trembling under the weight of emotions I had buried for decades. Guilt, fear, pride, emptiness, all of it spilling out, raw and unrestrained. "You don't understand," I cried. "I've spent years trying to hold people together. Weddings, funerals, prayers. I told them to trust. I told them God was there. But I didn't believe it myself. I was a fraud." Her tear-streaked face didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She didn't correct me. She simply extended her hand again, palm open, as though to say, "I know, and I am still here." I couldn't take it. My heart broke wide open. The bitterness I had clung to for so long cracked apart under her gaze. I realized in that moment it wasn't disbelief that had ruled me. It was fear. Fear of being let down. Fear of silence. Fear that the heavens above were empty. And so I had built walls, thick, high, unyielding. But here was this woman, this mother, standing in my hospital room, looking at me with love that asked nothing and gave everything. I wept harder than I ever had in my life. Not polite tears, not restrained emotion, but guttural sobs that shook my weakened body. And she wept with me. Her tears were not of pity, but of shared grief, as though she carried every unanswered prayer I had whispered, every doubt I had nursed in the silence of the night, every funeral where I had spoken of hope I did not feel. She carried it, and in her tears it was no longer mine alone. Finally, when my sobbing eased enough to breathe, I looked at her again through blurred vision. My voice was hoarse, cracked, trembling. "What do you want from me?" Her lips curved slightly. not into a smile, but into something deeper, mercy. And then she spoke again, her words flowing like balm. I do not come to take, I come to give. You built walls around your heart, but love has always been waiting. Will you let it in? I broke again. Every excuse I had rehearsed, every wall I had built, every argument I had used to shield myself, all of it crumbled before the simplicity of her words. My lips trembled as I whispered the truth. I don't know how. She tilted her head gently, her eyes never leaving mine. Then begin by not clinging to what has hurt you. The scent of roses filled the room stronger now, as though every breath carried her presence deeper into me. My trembling hands rose from the blanket, halfway to her, desperate yet afraid. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel what I had been running from. Love. Not the abstract kind, not the ceremonial kind, but love raw and alive, staring at me in the face of a mother who had no reason to care for me, and yet did. That was the moment my pride collapsed. The rabbi, who had stood tall, unshakable, authoritative, was gone. In his place was just a man, broken, small, but finally honest. And in the silence of that hospital room, I whispered, tears streaming down my face, I don't deserve this, but don't leave me. She didn't move, she didn't fade, she only wept with me. And somehow, in that shared silence, I knew she wouldn't. I woke as if surfacing from deep water, lungs burning, eyes stinging, and yet somehow lighter. The first thing I noticed was my hands. They weren't clenched. For weeks, I had slept with fists tight against the sheets, knuckles white from pain and fear. Now, my fingers lay open, relaxed, as though they had finally remembered how to release. The room was the same, grey pre-dawn light leaking through the blinds, the steady telemetry of the heart monitor, the soft hiss of oxygen. But it felt different. The air didn't press on me anymore. I drew a breath, and it didn't catch halfway like a snagged thread. It filled my chest, slow and full, as if something inside had made space. I shifted to my side. The movement had been agony yesterday. Today it was effort, yes, but not torment. A small, incredulous laugh escaped me. It sounded strange in the quiet. Then, memory returned like a tide, the fragrance of roses, the blue veil, the eyes that met mine and did not look away when I broke. I pressed my hand to my face and found it still damp with dried tears. Was it a dream? I whispered. I didn't know how to answer. I only knew that whatever it was, I was not the same man who had fallen asleep. A nurse peeked in, then froze when she saw me sitting more upright than I had managed in days. Rabbi? She said carefully, like a question. I cleared my throat. I feel better. She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, professional calm sliding over her features as she checked my vitals. Her eyes flicked from the monitor to me and back again. Your heart rate is steadier. Oxygen saturation's up. Blood pressure. That's new. She glanced at the chart, then at me. Did you get any new meds overnight? I shook my head. She lifted my wrist, counting under her breath, then smiled despite herself. Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. She turned to go, then paused in the doorway. I don't usually say this on shift, but sometimes we see things we can't explain. She gave a small nod, almost like a blessing, and left. Alone again, I let the silence settle. Gratitude rose first, not the rehearsed kind, I had spoken at hospital bedsides, but something raw and unsteady that filled my chest until it ached. Words I hadn't meant for years reached my lips on their own. If you are real, don't leave me as I am. The sentence trembled out of me, an offering and a surrender. I hadn't known how to pray honestly in so long, but now I did not try to perform. I didn't reach for eloquence or tradition. I let the truth speak in 5 simple words. Don't leave me as I am. Because I knew who I had been. Proud, exhausted, afraid to hope. I didn't want that man back. I closed my eyes. No visions came this time, no fragrance of roses, just a warmth in the center of my chest and a quiet that did not feel empty. I stayed inside that quiet a long time. When the rounding team came, their surprise was less restrained than the nurses. The residents' eyebrows shot up at the numbers. The attending asked questions twice, then had me repeat small movements he'd abandoned the day before. We were preparing for a different conversation, he admitted finally, tapping his pen against the chart. This is an encouraging deviation. He cleared his throat. We'll run labs again. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but keep doing whatever you're doing. When they left, I reached for the bedside drawer. Beneath the stack of admission papers and plastic-wrapped tissues lay a small, forgotten book, a gift from an old friend years ago. I had accepted it then to be polite and tucked it away without opening it. The New Testament, slim and unassuming, a paper cross embossed on the cover. I stared at it, thumb resting on the edge. Old reflexes stirred, caution, defensiveness, the complicated tangle of identity and history. But last night's gaze, that uncondemning mercy, untied the knot with a single, gentle pull. Whatever walls I had built, she had not come to tear them down in triumph, but to open a door I had kept locked. If love had come this far to find me, perhaps I could take one step to meet it. I opened the book. I did not start at the beginning. My hands turned of their own accord to words I had heard quoted over the years and never risked reading with my own eyes. I landed in the Gospel of Luke and found a sentence that landed in me like water on parched ground. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich he has sent away empty. I exhaled, feeling the edges of the verse trace the outline of my past months. My hunger that bread could not touch, my emptiness disguised as certainty. I read on, hungrily now, not as a debater collecting arguments, but as a thirsty man cupping his hands under a spring. I found a wedding in Cana, where jars meant for ritual cleansing filled with wine. A widow in Nain, whose son was raised. A mother who pondered mysteries in her heart. The names I had kept at arm's length, Jesus, Mary, stepped off the page, not as lines in a dispute, but as people who moved with a mercy that healed what law alone could not. I paused often, not to analyze, but to breathe. Each time I set the book down, I whispered the only prayer that fit inside my chest. Don't leave me as I am. Midday came. My daughter arrived with a coat draped over her arm and worry etched in the corners of her mouth. The worry shifted when she saw me. Abba? I'm all right, I said, surprised to find I meant it. I told her only what I could say without breaking down, that I had slept, that I felt lighter, that the doctors were hopeful. I did not yet tell her about the night visitor or the fragrance lingering at the edges of memory. Some things are too tender to name before noon. She noticed the book on my tray. Her eyes flicked from the cross on the cover to my face. She did not judge, She only asked, very softly, "Do you want me to read to you?" I nodded. She read from Matthew. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." My eyes filled, weary and burdened. If a sentence could lift a body, that one did. The rest of the day passed in small mercies. A lab result that steadied a prognosis. A nap without nightmares. Soup that tasted like something. The quiet courage to say thank you out loud, not to an empty room, but to the one who had stood in it. Night returned. I did not dread it. I turned out the TV and let the dark settle. I spoke the prayer again, this time not as a gasp, but as a promise. If you are real, don't leave me as I am. And then I added 6 more words I had not dared in years. I won't leave you either. No apparition came, no bells tolled, but I didn't need them. The proof was in the peace I could not manufacture, and in the strength I had not earned. Before sleep, I picked up the book once more and found words that felt like a hand on my shoulder. "Behold, I am with you always." I closed my eyes around the sentence and let it hold me. I do not know what tomorrow will bring. I know only this. The man who woke this morning is not the man who fell asleep last night. Some part of me that was dying long before my diagnosis is alive again. The doubts have not vanished, but they no longer sit on the throne. Pride does not need to keep me safe. Love is doing that now. And if you ask me what changed, I will tell you without hesitation. A mother came to my bedside and taught me to pray like a son. If you are real, don't leave me as I am. And gently, unmistakably, the answer came, not in thunder, but in mercy. I won't. I once thought I had all the answers. After all, wasn't that my role? To be the teacher, the rabbi, the one others looked to for wisdom when their worlds cracked apart? I wore that mantle for decades, confident on the outside, even when doubt gnawed at me from within. I thought faith was tradition, duty, ceremony, something to be preserved like an heirloom, not lived like breath. But mercy is not an heirloom. Mercy is alive. And it came to me when I least deserved it, when I least expected it. The weeks that followed my awakening in that hospital bed unfolded like chapters in a book I didn't know I'd been longing to read. Each day, strength returned. First, in small ways, I could sit without gasping, stand without dizziness, walk to the window and watch the city breathe beneath me. Then, in larger ways, blood work shifting, scans showing improvement, the doctors could not reconcile with the dire prognosis written in my chart. They called it anomalous recovery. I called it mercy. Nurses whispered about the turnaround. One doctor, hardened by years of statistics and case files, admitted in a quiet moment, "I can't explain this. Medically, you should not be here." His words didn't trouble me. I had seen an explanation that didn't fit in charts. I carried her eyes in my memory, eyes that wept with me, not against me. And in that weeping, something old in me died and something new was born. Leaving behind the identity I had built wasn't easy. I had lived as a rabbi, wrapped in the garments of tradition, the rhythm of prayers, the weight of community expectation. To let go felt, at first, like betrayal. Betrayal of my ancestors, my teachers, the voices that had shaped me. But the more I wrestled, the more I realized I wasn't betraying them. I was stepping into the fulfillment of what they had yearned for all along. I opened the New Testament each day, and every page met me like a mirror and a door. I saw promises I had known since childhood suddenly alive with color. I read of Simeon holding a child in his arms, whispering that his eyes had seen salvation. I read of Mary keeping all these things in her heart. And I knew what I had been searching for wasn't abandoned in Christ. It was completed in Him. I told my family. It was not easy. There were tears, confusion, silence at the dinner table. Some felt betrayed. Some felt afraid. I could not blame them. I had lived in that fear myself. But I spoke softly, not with arguments or proofs, only with the truth of what I had seen. I did not choose this, I told them. Mercy chose me. And mercy has never let me go. I walk now in peace I never knew before. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of presence. When I pray, I do not recite words to a ceiling. I speak to the one who sat beside me in the valley of shadows and sent his mother to weep with me when I was too proud to weep alone. I still wear the scars of illness. My body carries reminders of what was broken. But I am no longer afraid of them. Scars are not shame. They are proof of healing. And when I stand before others now, not as rabbi, not as teacher, but as a man transformed, I tell them the truth. I thought faith was tradition. But in my darkest hour, mercy came as a mother. She did not come to condemn me, but to open the door I had locked from the inside. Through that door walked not despair, but Christ, the one I had overlooked, the one I had resisted, the one who was there all along. So I tell my story, not because I want applause or agreement, but because someone, somewhere, is lying awake in a hospital bed tonight whispering, "Don't leave me as I am." And to them I say, He won't. Mercy still comes, sometimes quietly, sometimes through tears, sometimes in the soft rustle of a blue veil in the silence of the night. If my story touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, because the world needs to know that miracles still happen and mercy still finds us, even when we think we've run too far.